first, let's cover the length or size, length of these two units. So this is the 6HP21 that came out of the car. I'm not sure if it's the same as a 6HP19, you can research it, but this one that I'll be measuring is a 6HP21. And where we find that is down here, 6HP21. The other unit, of course, that we're measuring is going to be the 8HP70. There it is there, 8HP70. And so the first measurement that we want to talk about is the length, and the way that I've done it, or measuring it, is I've got the adapter on the back here. It's got some flat faces there. We're going to sit that straight edge on there, and we're going to measure from that, the edge of that straight edge, then up to the edge of the bell housing. This has an adapter piece on it we're going to talk about in a second, but up to the front of the aluminium housing. So the 8HP70, that measurement from that face to the front of the bell housing is 668 millimeters. Then I've got a 15 millimeter adapter. That's that part there. That came, I think it's a Dommy Works one. It came from 8speed.au. And that's 15 millimeters, so I need to add that on to the overall length, and I end up at 683 millimeters for the 8HP70. When I do the same measurement on here, on the 6HP21, holding that in the same position on the adapter, measuring from the back of the straight edge here to the edge to this face here where it mounts on the engine, the 6HP21 comes in at 677 millimeters. So 677 millimeters versus 683 is a 6 millimeter difference in length, which is, I think, a quarter of an inch, a quarter of an inch roughly. So this ends up a quarter of an inch longer with its adapter plate. So you'll need to take that into consideration for your tail shaft. But I believe I'm not going to be using the stock tail shaft, but I believe the stock tail shaft will compress that 6 millimeters or a quarter of an inch, and so you can use the stock tail shaft with the 8HP70 in the 335 and probably also the 135. Now we'll talk about the adapter on the back here where the guibo mounts up. So 6HP21, 8HP70. So on mine, the 6HP21, this was the guibo or stock guibo that came off of it. So trans that way. So this went on something like, if I can hold it in position, went something like that. And there's two ways to do the measurement on this. I think the correct way is measuring centre to centre between these holes here. But there are some companies like Seems Legit Garage that measure from one hole here to the centre of this hole to the centre of an opposite hole, which is effectively measuring from one of these holes to a hole that doesn't exist on the transmission. That's on the tail shaft. So to do the measurement that Seems Legit Garage use, you need your guibo and you just measure, and they talk about it being a 105 millimeter or a 110 millimeter between those centre to centre of opposite holes. The other way of measuring it is, as I say, is I think a bit more straightforward, is between the centre and centre of two holes here. And this comes in at about 90 millimeters to match up with the 105 millimeter measurement of Seems Legit Garage between opposite holes. So there is on the 8HP70s, they can come with a larger adapter. Luckily, mine has come with exactly the same size adapter as my 6HP21, so I don't need to do anything. But a lot of these come with a larger adapter that has bigger spacing between these holes. And so it's 95 millimeters center to center of these holes. Or on the guibo, if you have the guibo to measure it, it's 110 millimeters center to center of the holes, opposite holes on the guibo. So keep that in mind. If you do get an 8HP70 with the adapter with the holes spread further apart, and you're trying to use your original guibo and tail shaft, which is probably the easiest way to do things, then you can undo this nut here and take this off. Take the one off your 6HP21 and swap them over to bring that one from your 6HP21 across to your 8HP70. But you'll need to get a very deep, I think 36mm socket to do that, and probably replace this nut. I'm guessing it's a single-use nut, but it is possible to swap them over. While we're at the back here, this spigot that sticks out is 14mm in diameter on the 6HP21, and I think it comes out about 30 odd millimeters. And on here it's about an extra 3mm longer, but it's also 14mm in diameter. So I'm confident won't need to make any changes to that, but if you had any interference, then you just lop a few millimeters off the end of this one. But they are the same. That spigot is the same diameter, and so when I change to a Ford 8.8 diff with a custom tail shaft from Seems Legit, I'll be using this unit here instead of the Guibo and bolting up a whole different assembly to this, and this unit does center then on that 14mm spigot that sticks out. So just to show you that it slides on there the same. Go there we go, so it fits on there the same. So that's the adapter at the back and the differences between the different Guibos that can come on the 8HP70. The next topic is brackets and cross members. So 6HP21, 8HP70. The 6HP21 bracket, this part here, is still bolted on here. Haven't unbolted it because it's no good to me on the 8HP70. These are in the right position. The attachments from the bracket to the cross member, we're going to talk about that in a minute, but where this bracket, the 4 bolts, 1, 2, 3 and 4 bolt onto the transmission, are in a different position on the 8HP70. So it's just straight away, these 2 bolts at the top here are much further apart on the 8HP70. So you aren't using your 6HP21 bracket on your 8HP70. And in fact, I've got some other brackets lying around. I had this one here, a 7-speed N54 DCT bracket, and this one here also isn't going on there. So I think the holes here too far apart. On this one are too far apart, and on that one they're too narrow. So that's no good to us either. So DCT bracket, no good. What you're looking for is one of these, which is a 330D N57 bracket. I think it's from the 6HP26 transmission in an E9X 330D. And this is the bracket that is going to fit on the 8HP70 and work with your stock cross member from your car. So this bracket, let's try and find the part number on it. There it is there. I'll try and read that out to you. 223267600305. The -01 is probably just a revision number, but that's the part number of the bracket. You can buy it new from, I think, FCP Euro, ECS Tuning, etc., or find one at a Wreckers, like I did, and that will bolt up to there. So that all 4 bolts that bolt that to the transmission will work for us. They're in the right position. And then these 2 parts of the bracket where it goes to the cross member are in the right position to slot over that. So with cross members, I've ended up with 3 different cross members because I misunderstood one of the 0 to 60 videos where he said go and get yourself a 330D cross member. So I did that, not realizing it's actually the 330D bracket that you need. I think that's what he said. So this is my original bracket from the vehicle that I'm putting it back in, the 2007 335i with the N54 with the 6HP21. That's the original bracket. Turn that over and sit it like that for a minute. This bracket here is from a 335i N54 E90 DCT car, so an E90 instead of an E92 and a DCT instead of a 6HP21. Let's turn that over and sit it there. And then this bracket is from the one that I bought, a 2010 E90 330D, which had the 6HP 26 or 6HP 28 transmission with the N57 engine. So that's a bracket that I bought. And when I line all three up like that, and actually see the part numbers are identical. So 2232 up here, and then 6778060. On this one, all the numbers happen to be in there. It's exactly the same part number though. And in here, on the 330D one, it's also the same part number, all buried in that little triangle area there. So your original bracket, your original cross member from your car will work if you get this 330D bracket from an N57 powered 330D with the 6HP 26 or 6HP 28 transmission. That's what we need, that's the combo. Next topic is the transmission cooler lines. So 6HP21, 8HP70. 6HP21 stock transmission cooler lines look like this. They're like a metal tube and spin around that way. And the ends of these tubes go in the two holes here. And this is possible, apparently, to make it work on the 8HP70, but you need to straighten out some of the kinks in the tube here to get a bit of extra length in it, maybe to make up for the adapter plate, I'm not sure, but I have seen and been told that it's definitely possible to make it work, just with a bit of careful manipulation of these pipes. You might have to take them completely off to do the job, but they apparently you can make it work with the 8HP70. However, I'm going to be changing the cooler at the other end, going to an air to oil cooler, and so I've chosen to do away with these lines altogether and just put this adapter on here. This comes from DomiWorks, so there's the part number DWOCAN57. And that's this adapter here. It doesn't come with that little gold coloured blanking plug there. I just put that on while I was cleaning the transmission to stop water getting in there. But that will adapt to, I think it's an 8AN fitting on these. So 8AN lines, flexible lines, then running up to my cooler. And that's the other option that is available to you. So the Bellhousing bolt patterns, so we've got the 6HP21, the 8HP70. They have a different Bellhousing bolt pattern to bolt up to their respective engines, but there is this adapter plate available. This one I got from 8speed.au, which I think is the DomiWorks one, and this adapter plate is probably made by other companies as well, but this effectively converts the bolt pattern from the N54 engine side on this side to the 8HP70 on the other side. It actually bolts up to the engine first, and then the transmission bolts up to the adapter plate, so please don't fry me in the comments. I've just bolted it on here to show you how it bolts onto the transmission, and so you'll need an adapter plate to make it work. And why I bolted on here is to show then about the starter motor modification. So the N57 engine, I think it is, that this normally bolts up to, has a starter motor down the bottom corner here. So starter motor is going to be on the underside of the engine, down under there somewhere, and on the N54 it's up here. So we want to maintain the N54 starter motor position, so the bracket or the adapter here helps to facilitate that. So come over here, you see I've cut a bit out of the top of the bell housing. The bell housing is sort of webbed, so there's two layers to it. On the underside there we've cut more out, just due to the shape of the starter motor, the snout wider in different parts, and I've spent a lot of time trying to get that right, and this is what we've ended up with. So using a angle grinder, cut-off saw, hacksaw, whatever pieces of equipment, file, actually used a lot of file, a little bit of a die grinder, we've got that cutout made for the starter motor. And you're just basically test fitting it until it works. You can take a lot of extra material out if you want to make it easy on yourself, but I didn't want to remove any more than I had to, and that will end up sitting somewhere roughly. Try and hold it steady, somewhere like that. And you'll see there's a gap between the starter motor and the and that adapter plate. And that gap in this side here is to allow for this part here. So the starter motor is going to come through from this side, and so it's already got a, I don't know, 15, a 20 millimeter thereabouts spacer on that side. So keep that in mind as I slide that in there. There's going to be sit off about 20 millimeters, something like that. And I've ended up with a 2 millimeter clearance at least all the way around the starter motor snout here. As I said, you could just cut a whole lot more out and save yourself the trouble of bolting it up. So I've had this transmission on and off, I don't know, 6 or 7 times in that process, just to make sure that I wasn't taking off too much and to get it just right. But yeah, it was a pretty straightforward modification process. And finally here, the torque converter. Let's talk about that. We've got the 6HP21, 8HP70. 8HP70's got our adapter plate still bolted on it. The torque converter from the 6HP21 is no good to us, so you can't reuse that. But we can use the torque converter from the 8HP70. It does have a lower stall as it's coming from a diesel engine, but it's going to work. I'm going to give it a go. There is some minor modifications and some welding required to make it work, but if you're ordering your 8HP70 transmission, try and get it with the torque converter, because you're going to need one of them, and this is going to do the job. Follow on this video after this little segment here. We'll talk about the modification required to this torque converter to make it work. And then as far as flex plates go, we're going to use the N54 flex plate. So we're not using the flex plate from the N57. We're going to use the N54 original flex plate, and that's going to bolt up to the crank, and then it's going to bolt up to this torque converter. Now for transmission controllers, there's a number of options out there. I've decided to just go, I think, with what would be the easiest option, the Turbo Lamik unit, and bought that through 8speed.au as the N54 kit. And then I needed to find myself a shifter to be compatible with this setup. So this is the shifter that will go in the car. It's from an E84 X1 with an 8-speed DCT. So it's not obviously the 8HP70. It'd be a smaller 8 HP transmission, but that's the shifter. I think it was a 2014 or 2015 model from memory. I bought it from the wreckers, and there's a modification to be done to the wiring there, the pin out of the wiring. So search for that online. Zoom in there, you might be able to see it. Pause the video, and basically the green wire that's at the bottom, I think, started life at the top, and then had to remove that plug and change the position of all the wires to end up like that. And so far I think that's right. We've had it plugged in, not getting any fault codes, and we can see this lighting up doing its stuff. So yeah, that's the transmission controller that I'm using. If you're using a CAN TCU or a HTC or HTX, whatever it's called, I don't know what shifter you'll need, but if you're using the Turbo Lamik kit with an N54 adapter loom, which includes then the plug here to go to the original plug that would have gone to that transmission, plugs in there, and then this has a new plug that goes to this transmission. So it effectively you don't have any major modifications to your wiring in your car. There is a little jumper cable that's needed for the original connector, I think, that goes into the shifter in the car that came with this kit that I've put on. But yeah, this doesn't require any cutting or splicing of wires in your loom, only the changing of the wires that came on this loom to match this. Now, the change that I've done to that wiring down there, I believe, is necessary because I've chosen to use the X1 E84 shifter. I think there's a 5 series option to use a shifter from a 5 series, maybe a 530D or something like that. in which case then you leave the wiring as it was, as it came, and you don't need to modify it apparently. But using the E84 X1 shifter, I've needed to modify it. So this E84 X1 shifter, the 3 bolts here, 1, 2, 3, you see them, the mounting bolts, are in the exact right position for the E92 that I've got, and I'm pretty sure it'll be the same for the E90, etc., all the E9X cars, and maybe also the 135s, etc. So those 3 bolts are in exactly the right position, and this seals off the original hole in the transmission tunnel as well. So there's no modification required to the chassis or anything else or any sort of adapters to be able to bolt this into the car. It bolts straight in. Now I'm got a stripped interior for race car, so I don't really care about whether or not this fits in the original position and covers the hole, but need to point out that the original 6 HP shifter has a bigger cover here. So try and come over the top. See, this area is a lot larger coming out there than what it is on this side. So yeah, you'll need to work out, you know, if you want to cosmetically make it fit right, maybe you can remove this, remove the shifter on both of these and swap the boots over to make it work, but that's something to be aware of. Let's have a quick look at the Turbo Lamik N54 wiring harness. We've got the Turbo Lamik controller, a big multi-pin plug there, sort of like the DME plug. We've got 3 smaller leads that all need to go to the cabin, the rotary dial for choosing your program mode, the LCD display, and the plug for the shifter. They're all those 3 smaller leads. This shorter transmission lead is a female socket that the plug from the 6HP21 transmission plugs into there. It sort of looks like that. That's the male version of it. That plugs into there. The one from the 6HP21 goes in there, and then this is the new, it's a longer lead than that one, and this is the new line out to the 8HP70 transmission. Potential ways to bring it in and out of the cabin area and the options. So I've unbolted the 8HP shifter here, and that's the original 6HP21 shifter. So if I lift that up, you'll see, let's just flip it that way, you'll see there's a big oval shaped hole that was always there, and a little round hole that was always there. The little round hole is for the park lock cable there that passes down through, mechanical park lock cable that's physically attached to the side of the old shifter, goes down through that hole to the transmission. The new shifter is all digital electronic. There's no park lock cable, and so although the 8HP70 does have a way to mechanically engage neutral on the side of the box, it's not, we can't just connect it up to this. I am, for the sake of making the car, if I break down the side of the racetrack and need to go on a tow truck, I don't want to have to jack the car up. So I do need a way to activate that neutral lock or park lock. And so I'm actually going to try and modify this cable and bring it back through that hole. But anyway, this, if you're happy to have the Turbo Lamik controller in your engine bay, then there's no modification. You don't have to put a single mark on your paintwork or damage any metal work or cut any holes to bring cables through. You can simply poke all these 3 cables through this hole, so including this green connector fits through that hole without depinning it, and you've got this rotary dial here, control knob, and the little LCD display. So they're the 3 that you must, or you need in the cabin regardless, and they fit through that hole without any problem. So you would poke them through the hole like that, but then you would pull this seal back, and you can see it's like it's been designed for a park lock cable to go through there. So then you could cut along where I'm pointing with my fingernail, cut a slit in there, pass all those cables through the slit and up through that gap in the plastic there, and put that back on there. You'll have your cables coming up through where I'm pointing there. If you want to reseal it, just get a silicone gun and just fill the thing with silicone, and you'll have a perfectly sealed thing. This will then sit flat down against the hole, which it won't in my case because the cables are sort of sitting up above the hole. But then that'll sit down through. The cables can come out there. You can route them wherever you need to go, underneath your carpets and center console, etc., and you will be good to go. But your Turbo Lamik controller is in your engine bay. So the options to avoid that, if you want your Turbo Lamik controller in the cabin, a few moments later. This is how you would do it if you want your Turbo Lamik controller in the cabin, or this is how I would do it anyway. So we have the Turbo Lamik controller, and interestingly, I've gutted this car, and interestingly, that's actually sitting over some bolts, some little captive bolts. Unfortunately, they're not long enough to put nuts on, but they hold the speaker tray in place from memory, and that actually is pretty secure on there. Once you put a seat over the top of it, I think that'll be fine. So Turbo Lamik controller there, you can bring cables up around this side or around on that side, whatever you prefer. I've got one coming up on that side. That's the plug that's going to go into the back of the shifter. These other cables here would go, if you wanted to, go under your carpet up around there. So we've got a little rotary dial and our little LCD display there. You can bring them out underneath or into the ashtray or whatever you want. So yeah, the connector here, this is, I've even got this sort of screwed in place. I don't have the rubber boot on it at the moment, just to make it a bit easier to show you. But let me just undo these, and you'll see that I've made some modifications to whoops, now I've probably lost those, to the base of this. So you can see the area that I've cut out there. I haven't modified the seal yet, but I'll be cutting a slit in the seal, and so by modifying it like so, I probably cut out a bit too much there on the left of frame, but yeah, you need to go hard up against on that edge there, against the thing, so that can actually now go around those cables and lock into place. It is pushing them hard up against this sharp edge, so if you wanted to do this without doing any modifications to your chassis, then you'd want to put a little bit of like a rubber edge on there, like a door seal type, U-shaped door seal type material or something like that, to stop it rubbing through on these. And you might find that you need to file out a little bit more on this edge here, just around there, and but otherwise, yeah, you saw I had the screws in there, that'll bolt in, and with the rubber seal in place, that'll go down. It's not going to seal as well as bringing the cables through this hole, but it's going to seal pretty well, and yeah, you can fill that little void. That void in there, fill that up with silicone if you want, once it's all back together and your seal's on there. So let's have a look at the cables. So we're bringing now, this is pulled as along the shortest possible route from the engine bay, from the DME. It is a right-hand drive car, so my DME is over on that corner. I can't say for a left-hand drive car whether you're going to have this much length, more or less, but for a right-hand drive car, that's the original 6HP 21 transmission plug coming to there, and that's plugged into the female socket of the cable or the loom of the Turbo Lamik controller. Now, if you didn't have enough cable to bring that plug all the way in the cabin, in fact, if you had carpets in here and you don't want this clunky thing sitting under the carpet, then you're probably actually going to want to poke that back through the hole and just take the Turbo Lamik cable back through there and have the plug sitting, on top of the transmission somewhere outside there. And there is enough, I've actually got this loom tucked in and underneath there, so there is enough loom that you can go out and get that plug in on top of the transmission. The other connector, of course, is the control connector or control loom from the Turbo Lamik to the 8HP70, and I think I've plugged it in, but let's have a look. can just see, I'll try and zoom in, sort of see that cable, you follow the route of it, but that's actually plugged into the back of the transmission down there behind that Torx head screw. So let's zoom back out there. You won't want this cable hitting on your guibo there, so we're going to have to route it around over that side somewhere. Can't get the camera under there, but something like that, and tie it off against the transmission or against the chassis there, just to make sure it doesn't go anywhere near that. And see if I pull it forward now, that's going to hit on the back of or on that adapter coming out of the transmission. So you want to avoid all that, find some routing or routing that keeps you away from all the moving parts. But that is possible then, to have your Turbo Lamik controller under your passenger seat. And I suspect the cables would be long enough for it to go in the glove box as well. Let me think. Yeah, all of those. It's maybe just this connector. Yeah, that'll be long enough. Yeah, you'll be able to have it in a left-hand drive or right-hand drive car. That cable is going to be long enough, but you're going to end up probably with this plug assembly literally just outside here, just outside this hole in the transmission tunnel. Okay, we're under the car here. Try and focus on that little hole up there. So let's poke a cable tie at it. See that hole I'm poking the cable tie at? That hole is much larger on the top part of the transmission and smaller underneath. Now I've already got mine up in there. You can access it from the top to put a cable tie through it, and that's to tie off your transmission cable there. It runs right near it. It'd be a perfect tie off spot. I either have to use a small cable tie, or in my case, because I don't have sound deadening, I'll just tie it off to some of these holes here on the transmission tunnel. But if you've got the sound deadening in place, the factory sound deadening, then strongly recommend drilling that hole out to be a bit larger before you mount your transmission. Just drill it out large enough for a big fat cable tie like this, and then after you've mounted your transmission, from the hole, which I'll try and point at it, and just see it's up there where I'm pointing with the cable tie, you can reach through with your arm and put a cable tie through there and secure your transmission cable to there, to try and keep it away from the tail shaft assembly. Making progress, just using a pair of pliers there. I've rolled this edge back, so sort of folded it around on itself and made that hole there a little bit wider at that point, and it's a nice soft edge, so this isn't going to rub through. We've got a P-clamp around these, and then I think it's an M6 screw on there, and we're going to screw that from underneath through the captive screw here. So instead of putting a screw down from the top, that'll come from underneath. The stud will, the top of that bolt there will be like a stud sticking up, and then I can just put a nut on the top of here, a little washer and a nut to secure that, and then just put bolts back through the other two. There's my finished product, cables through there, and the Turbo Lamik controller under the seat. So that's the 8 HP 70 shifter. This is the 6 HP 21 rubber boot, and this little plastic piece comes off easily from that other one, which won't be able to really stay on there. And then that's the park lock cable. So I've figured out, I'm cutting all the plastic and the rubber boot out of the way, I can put this on, but this cable's going to sort of run down the side. It will need to run down the side of this shifter. May not be so neat. Then I need a way of locking it out, so I'd probably put a handle basically coming out of here that I can grab hold of and pull back on, and actually that's in the pulled back position to disengage the park lock. That's about how much travel it would have. Then I need some way of locking it sort of in that position, so I was thinking of something like a little U-shaped piece that fits over with a finger screw on it, like a grub screw, that can lock against that and hold it in position, or just a piece of sort of like U-channel that slides over the top and locks up against that side and stops that from sliding back in under spring. It's not connected underneath at the moment. We'll have a look underneath in a second, but this is about the range of movement required. So from about, I worked out from about there to about there. Okay, there's the underside complete. Made this little bracket up. I don't know what was originally there. Maybe there's a suitable bracket to hold that in place, but yeah, just got a bit of mild steel drill to hold in it, slight radius in it. That holds that piece in place, and then this can slide backwards and forwards. Now, it's a stainless steel rod, so I had to get the TIG welder out. I haven't TIG welded stainless for a long time, and it shows. Forgot to turn the gas on there, and then had the amps too low over this side and heated the piece up way too much, and then it basically melted. But anyway, it's working, it ain't going anywhere, and there's a little bit of free play in there, and that's deliberate so that I can, when I undo that, I can actually slide that up and it unlocks from in there, but it won't pop out of there with this bracket in place. So let's go up in the cabin and have a look at how it works. Here it is on top, so I sort of cut that out to go in there, but it really needs this part here. There's normally a clip that goes over that. There it is there. That normally goes over that and locks that into something solid. I don't have anything on here. I thought about maybe I make up a bracket and just screw it down to this. I might still do that, or run a bracket from this hole across to that hole, diagonally across there with something welded on that I can put that clip on to hold that secure, because with that held secure, then pulling on this doesn't all fly apart, as you're going to see. Now I can only do this one-handed, so it's going to fly apart or come apart, but yeah, that's the part brake disengaged, and now it's back to engaged. So yeah, it all just comes apart a bit, but it is possible. So I've just put a coach head bolt through here, and then some nylon tube or whatever, PVC tube over that, and it's easy enough to grab and pull on. There's still no way of locking it out, so I need to make up something on here, probably a little bit that clips over that to lock it in once I've made some way of securing this part. But definitely I can certainly sit in the car and pull on that and hold it in neutral, even if I have to do that while I'm going on the tow truck with it. So a few moments later, or weeks later, this is what I came up with. It was just going to be a temporary solution, but it's working for me. It's obviously not going to work for you if you've got your full interior, but with this I can obviously hold on to it to get the car into neutral temporarily. But now I can just pull back on that, lock that in there, and that holds it in neutral, and if I release the part brake, the car will roll forward. And I can confirm there's good news for shifting with this N54 Turbo Lamik kit, the X1 shifter, minor modification to the pins there, that I've got full manual control here, so this is all a bit loose, but I can downshift clicking that forward, upshift clicking that back, but also both paddles work. And of course on the BMW, forward to downshift and back to upshift on both of them, and both paddles work to downshift and both paddles work to upshift. And this is a non-M Sport car, just the factory paddle setup works perfectly. So I've got the mode switch mounted down here now, and it's been set up sort of like a clock, because I guess the divisions between each mode are actually like 1/12 of a rotation for the 8 modes. So that's mode 1 at 1 o'clock, mode 2 at 2 o'clock, 3 at 3 o'clock, etc., all the way around to 8 o'clock. So mode 3 is what I use mostly for drag racing, the manual mode, and so it's easy to visually see when it's in that mode. The gauge for the Turbo Lamik is mounted on top of the steering column here. Somebody needs to make up some 3D printed cases or boxes for this little display, if they haven't done so already, but yeah, this was the way that I did it. Yeah, obviously not going to suit everybody if you're trying to keep your car nice and neat and tidy. It could also mount it up there, but I found that very useful from where I'm sitting. That's my view, so it really just blocks out the bottom line of the centre gauge there. And I can just lift my head slightly if I want to see that odometer reading. But that's the gauge there. I'll turn my little rotary dial. We can see the program modes changing, and oil temp's just at 25 at the moment. So that's the position that's ended up in, with the cable just running back around there, round behind the dash, and then coming out here down to the box.
I'll make a separate video on this feature and how to use it and put a link in the description. But just so you know, at this stage, the paddles work for the Transbrake feature on Turbo Lamik. So you can pull back on one paddle to engage Transbrake if all your other settings are in the right position, and then push forward on the other paddle to bump the car forward into staging for drag racing.
I'm on my welding bench. We've got, let's start with this, the N54 flex plate, the stock N54 flex plate. This 8HP 70Z torque converter from an N57 car. So that's the torque converter we're going to use. We need to marry that up with that. And to do it, we're going to use this DomiWorks kit. So N54, N55 to N57 kit from DomiWorks. It comes in a big box, but it just has these little parts in it. So it has 6 dooflickies. So these are just offset little adapters that we are going to weld into these holes here, something like that. So see that hole can be offset slightly to match up with the holes in this. So we've got those, and I've got 6 bolts and a temporary boss or adapter that goes over that centers the flex plate on the torque converter while we are putting the rest in place and tack welding it. For preparation, I've just used a wire wheel on a drill to clean up around the holes on both sides. This has come out of a car from the UK that's had obviously salt on the roads. It's a bit of surface rust, but yeah, it cleaned up all right where I need to weld it. The little centering boss goes on here. This mimics effectively the end of the end there, that little nub sticking out of the end of the crank. So this is mimicking that, allowing us to center this the flex plate onto the torque converter. So we slide that on, put that over, there we go. So without this, we've got all that movement. Now obviously the holes will still limit the movement. Let's try and line something up here. But you see there's still quite a bit of movement over those holes. So this is a vital piece that will limit that movement. So we get the flex plate lined up here. Oh, sorry, not that hole, this hole. That's just an observation hole. So they're sort of like oval shaped or rectangular holes, 5 of them. There is one round one. That one there is round. So we center those over the 6 holes in the torque converter. And we're going to slide these in from underneath, rotate them until the thread is visible, and then I will screw in one of those bolts. They're socket head cap screws. We'll screw those in and tighten them down a bit, and then we're going to come under here with a welder and we're going to tack weld this little dooflicky into place against the flex plate, against the torque converter there. So yeah, we'll get them in place first. The dooflickies are in place, and the socket head cap screws are holding them in. I've just done them up with an Allen key, just firm, but holding them underneath, making sure they don't spin, because they're centered properly where they need to be. So to know where to put them, as you tighten the socket head cap screw up with your fingers on top, you hold underneath and you just rotate the dooflicky until it's sort of centered. You'll feel it sort of hits too tight. It hits on one side, you rotate it about 45 degrees and it touches again. Go back halfway in between and then tighten the bolt up so that they're centered properly. This is in place still. So now I'll carefully flip this over, and then I can get in here and tack weld the dooflickies to the torque converter. We don't want anything going inside the torque converter, so I'll put the cap on, and now I've got good access. So that's what these little adapters, the dooflickies, will get welded on to the torque converter. These are the original ones, so effectively it's just a different position than these original ones, and the holes happen to be there, so there's no drilling and no special washers needed. Just tack weld these in place. Now I'm just probably going to put 2 or 3 little tack welds around it. Yeah, they don't have to be welded on with a big seam weld all the way around. Just a few tack welds will be enough to hold them in place while those bolts are tightened. So we've got 2 tack welds on each of them, like that, just to pull them down evenly. I flipped it back over onto this side, grabbed the Allen key, I've loosened these off, and they are all now easily, I can unwind them by hand, all of them. And that's what you want to check, because if any of them are tight, it means that the whole alignment isn't correct. And you could either grind your welds off and straighten things up, or potentially get a Dremel or a die grinder and make the holes in the flex plate a bit larger. That's probably what's happening, is the threads of your socket head cap screws are hitting on the side of the flex plate. But in my case, they're all fine. I can easily do them all up by hand, and still got my little boss here. We'll take that out. Actually, no, we won't. We'll leave that in just to start with. So with them loose, you'll see I get a bit of rotational movement that way. So remember, most of these holes are oval shaped, but it's the round one that becomes the limiting factor. I don't know, I'm pointing at that one. I don't know which one it is. But that's the movement I've got like that. Take this little boss out here. And what I want to see now is that I'm not pulled over to one side. I want to be able to push the flex plate that way and see it move that way. Put the boss back in, center it, take the boss out, push it to the left there, and see that it can move in all directions. So let me hold that over there and show you sort of what I mean. So there's to the right, there's to the left. So I'll pull it hard over to that side, and I can't get that back in without sliding it back the other way. There we go, get that in centered, take that out. Now I want to move it up and down, so in that direction and then in that direction. So let's see. Yep, I was able to move it that way, and I'll push it all the way back up the other way, and I shouldn't be able to get that back in very easily. No, I'll wiggle it a bit. Yep, there we go. So let's just make sure there's, okay, so I can't move it. There's basically like 1/2 a mil of movement, but I can't move it. Let's see, can't move it much in that direction. No, very little. So that's okay, I'm still happy with that. It still centers on there nicely. These are all able to be done up by hand. So now I'll flip it back over and put another 1 or 2 little tack welds on all of those dooflickies. Okay. Each has got 4 little tack welds. Not the best job, could have got a bit more penetration, had the volts up a bit higher. But see if we can get the camera in. You can see they also act like a bit of a spacer, so you can see them popping down underneath. So I'll let it cool down a little bit. I'll take it apart and I'll show you what it looks like. Flipped it over, use the Allen key to back them off again, and yeah, they're all now, I can move them all with my fingers. So nothing's binding up, and this little center boss here, this temporary boss, I can rotate that also. So that means that I'm not going to have any problem with trying to get bolts in later when this is in the car and having them bind up. And what I'm just going to verify now, I'm pretty confident it'll be fine, but I'm going to take out all the 6 bolts. I'm going to turn the flex plate around one set of holes and just see that they all line up, and just check a few different positions. But theoretically, the spacing of all these is equal, and considering I've got that little bit of free play, means I should be able to align any flex plate hole with any torque converter hole, and all the rest should line up. Okay, so that worked fine. I was able to try it in a couple of different positions and it all bolts up. So yeah, doesn't matter which way I have these patterns lined up, they all line up. Let's take that off. So this is temporary now. That well, won't go in the bin, but yeah, we've finished with it. Now it won't be needed again. So let's see there how these are all aligned. There we go. And you'll see these just sit up proud above the torque converter there. Taking the verniers and taking a few measurements. So it's about 1.8 to 2 millimeters that they stick up. So I've obviously done this using the DomiWorks kit, but I can see that it'd be perfectly possible to do it just using normal hardware. You just need 6 bolts, M10 bolts, or socket head cap screws like that. I think it's got about 15 mil of thread on it. You'd need some M10 nuts, preferably plain if you don't want to inhale welding fumes, but zinc plated or cadmium plated or whatever like this would be fine as well. And you'll need 6 washers that are 2 millimeters thick, M10 as a minimum, but you could also use M12, M14, ½ inch. Anything bigger than a 10 millimeter ID hole will be fine, and just aim for that 2 millimeter thickness. This one, for example, is 1.97 millimeters, which would be just fine. And then you'll need a centering boss. So if you don't have this, then you need a N54 crank or a spare N54 crank, or you do this job with it all mounted on the engine, on the end of the crank. But this boss here, using the verniers to measure it, it's 42.0 something millimeters OD, so 42 millimeter OD, 32 millimeter ID. And it fits just over that, and obviously fits just inside of that. So it has it's about 30 millimeters high there. There is a bearing available, I believe, that has the same dimensions, that has a 32 millimeter ID and a 42 millimeter OD, and sits about the same height. So you could buy one of those bearings and use it. I reckon there's also pipe available, like PVC or polyurethane style pipe that has the same dimensions. So otherwise, yeah, make or machine up a boss like this one out of steel, but you will need something to center the flex plate onto the torque converter. So how would I do it? Slide that on. Obviously you've just got the larger holes here like I started with. You're going to just sit your washers roughly over those holes, put your 6 washers in place, then you grab your flex plate, you're going to lower that over the top and line up your holes through your washers. I haven't quite done it right there. Let's get that washer back in place. So your washers are going to be in place, something like that. Then you're going to get your M10 bolt. You're going to drop it through the hole. Obviously I've got a thread there now, but you'll just drop it straight through the hole. You'll get your M10 nut. You'll come in from underneath. You'll thread that on to your bolt or your socket head cap screw and tighten it up. Do that to all 6 and then flip it over and weld the nuts on first. So a couple of tack welds on the nuts, just like I welded these on. Weld the nuts on first. Once the nuts are on and you've done those checks like I did, then you'll dismantle it and take that off. And you'll be left with your nuts welded underneath, and you'll have 6 floating washers floating around on here. Take your washer, center it over the hole, put the bolt through, the washer and thread it into your nut that's welded captive on the other side. Wind it all the way down. Back it off a little bit, just center it there, tighten that down, and then that'll be sitting, in my case it's sitting 2 millimeters high, yours will be sitting flat against the torque converter. Then tack weld the washer to the torque converter. A couple of tack welds on there. It's not, all it's doing is holding it in place. So you probably just need literally one tack weld to be enough, but probably two, one here, one there. And if your tack welds sit up higher or more than 2 millimeters high, just grab a flap disc or a file or something, a grinder, and take them back to the level of the top of the washer. Unscrew the bolt and your washer will stay behind in the exact perfect place it needs to be, and rinse and repeat on your other 5 holes with their washers, and you'll end up with 6 washers welded on this side of the torque converter and 6 nuts welded to the other side, and you'll be in the same position as me, maybe arguably even better off, because you'll have a bigger surface area here than I've got. I've just got that little bit of surface area. So the transmission's been back in the car and it didn't go according to plan. I had a, let's call it a knocking noise. It's like I'm going to call it a wet knocking noise, because it sounded like it was inside the transmission or something with fluid around it. And that was the whole time that I was trying to warm the fluid up and set the level. And then when I tried just to attempt to drive it off the hoist, there was a sharp clanging sound, dry clanging. Something just like that. That sounded to me like something hitting on the ring gear. And so we stopped immediately, pulled the trans out and scratching ahead. And this is what I think is happening. So I think that my flex plate was warped to start with, and that was the start of all the issues, especially using the DomiWorks kit. So I'm going to come back to all these numbers and everything in a minute, but there's a little DomiWorks inserts. They're in there. You see they've been tack welded in, little 1, 2, 3, 4. You see the heat marks on this side of the 4 little tack welds on each of them. So you can't really weld too much on the inside. You couldn't get the MIG in there very well. So we just got those 4 tack welds there. Tried to emulate the same amount of weld and the same position of the weld on all 4 of them. So the heat marks are a little bit different size and shape, but you see it's like 4 petals there. So why have I done that? Well, I didn't mention earlier, but this needs to be a balanced setup. So if you go running big long welds around everything and end up with too much weld or different amounts of weld, then you might end up with a balance issue. And so I tried to get the same amount of weld on each of these inserts. And for that reason, I'm not going to cut them out to fix this problem. So let me explain what I think is going on. To weld these in, we had the little boss. We put the boss on there. That come with the DomiWorks kit, and you need that regardless of how you do this process. You need a boss or a centering boss, and then this went over like that. Let's line up the holes here, somewhere like that. So we've had like that. These little inserts are loose, so you hold them up against the back of the plate there, and we put all these screws in. And tighten these screws, get them all in, started finger tight, and then tighten them all down, effectively pulling what I thought was pulling the flex plate down against them, or pulling those little inserts up against the flex plate. But now imagine the surface of the flex plate is got a warp in it. It pulls these through the torque converter different amounts. So basically they're all set at slightly different heights. So I think that was probably the position that I had the flex plate in when I welded it. It's solid. I'm rocking around. It doesn't move. Watch what happens if I just move it 1 set of holes. There's 1 set of holes. And you hear that rocking? Clanging noise. That's because now it's not sitting flat on all of those 6 points, and it needs to. So it wasn't sitting flat even when I welded it. So I think the noise that I heard, the clanging noise, was actually the ring gear hitting on the starter motor. So there's evidence that the ring gear here, I mean, the starter motor pokes out to engage it, but there's a lot more, let's call it wear around on these teeth than there is. Let me find the part that hasn't worn so much. Oh, there we go, over the back there. So there's only a little bit of wear on the side of those teeth, and then it gets more and more and more, less, more. It's like waves of it. So, but around here there was a lot more wear on the ring gear. So this ring gear was actually hitting on the starter motor gear. I checked that the starter motor was installed properly, definitely installed properly. I'd ground enough out of the case so it wasn't like pulled out of shape or pushed towards the ring gear. It was actually the ring gear being pulled towards the starter motor. So let's take this off and have a look then. So what I've done now is I've just, and it was like I was today years old when I learned that a vernier has a step on the back of it, which makes this easy. Is you hold it there, put it down. And now I'm going to find it hard one-handed to replicate. There we go, 2 millimeters. I wrote 1.9 there, but so I've gone around and taken measurements of all of these at 4 points of how high the step is from the base surface. Now, the original N57 flex plate is sitting on this big flat surface here, and I'm sure this part of the torque converter is actually pressed into shape, and I can hold a level across those, and they're all really, really like flat. It sits properly on the whole surface, flat on the whole surface, because it was designed that way. When they stamped it, pressed it, they didn't really care what happened in between. So this surface in between is actually a little bit wavy. It actually falls away a bit. So it's higher here, and then it falls away as it gets closer to the outside edge. So this measurement is naturally going to be a little bit taller or a little bit higher here because of it falling away, but also because when you weld it, it pulls that up through further. So the welding, if you understand welding, the heat there as that cools, it's pulling this part through further than the inside where we're not welding. So we've got 1.7 millimeter step there, 1.9, 1.9 and 2.3. So we've got a 0.6 millimeter difference in the step. And there should be a difference in the step because of the falling away, just that is too much. Here 1.7 to 2.3, 2 to 2.1. So see how there's slight sort of variances in these. Generally the outside measurements are all maybe not too far out. They're all within, 0.2 of each other. Plus or minus 0.1 or 0.2 of each other, but the flex plate doesn't actually end up sitting flat on these. And so let me try and show you then why why that ring gear ends up hitting the starter motor. So zoom in with the camera there. So do you see that on the right there's a bigger gap on this side than there is on that side? And so imagine as the flex plate, which it can flex, it flexes and it pulls down and closes that little gap that you see on the right there. As it closes that gap, I'm going to change the camera zoom here, that pulls the ring gear up and away from the torque converter, and effectively then bringing it closer to the starter motor. So that's why that clearance or that little angle in there becomes a problem. And I don't really think there's any real easy way. I'm trying to zoom in. There you go, you can see the daylight. There you go, you can see the daylight on the left side of that. And so imagine, yeah, the flex plate, when it's on there, is pulling up all the way around the outside. So the ring gear's moving closer and it's magnified. The tiny bit of movement there, you know, if that's 0.2, 0.3 of a millimeter there, it's going to be like a millimeter on the outside. So I don't believe these Dommy Works kit is actually the right solution for this. And I think even to be honest, what the guys at 0 to 60 did, the cheap option, the tight ass option of using washers is actually a better idea. So for once, the cheap option is probably the better idea. I love the neatness of these. I love that they're like little cams, that the hold is offset and everything. You could still use them. In fact, you need this boss to do the job properly, and it comes with that. So you could still use them, but I think they really need a washer here on this side to spread that load around. And so now if I put a couple of washers on here, now I went to the hardware store and I spent about 20 minutes with a vernier caliper fishing through the boxer washers to find washers that were all the same thickness. So they all measured 2.4 millimeters thick. And keep in mind that number 2.4. Why I chose 2.4, why I definitely wanted 2.4 is that the biggest measurement I have here is 2.3. There's nothing bigger than 2.3, and I wanted these to sit proud of those little adapters, so that now the flex plate spreads its load across all that washer, much bigger surface area, because that surface area just isn't enough. Spreads it over a bigger surface area, and it's not pulling hard up against the adapter itself. The adapter is just the captive nut. Now, this shouldn't seem like rocket science, but it is actually exactly how BMW designed it. So if I try and zoom in there, you see that the captive nut is sitting just lower than the surface. So the load or the forces are flat against this area here, and note the size of the surface area, maybe more similar to our washer, and the captive nut is recessed down inside of it. So we're going to try and emulate that. Now, I noticed that with some of these washers, hard to see, but this washer actually rocks backwards and forwards. And that's a bit of the effect of this part of the surface not being flat. What we really need to do is use that surface, but these holes are too far out that, you'd end up having to drill right up against the ring gear to get a bolt through. So they're not an option for us to use those holes. But that would have been, some ideal way. But I think this at least is going to improve the situation, is having the washers sitting on there. So I'll put all the washers on here, and now the washers that I got, this was the only size I could easily find. They're actually, the bigger the better really, but they're not going to be, well, they don't just sort of automatically center on there. So I'll need to keep that in mind for like weight distribution, for the sake of balance, that I don't want like all the ones on this side to be in that position and the ones on the other side to be pushed the other way, because that might affect the balance a bit. So I want them all to be in the same spot, let's say centered there, or all hard up against the outside edge, like that. I'm not sure yet whether I'm going to glue them on or weld them on, because they don't need to be welded for the sake of permanency. They only need to be, let's say, glued on for the sake of holding them there while I marry this torque converter up to the flex plate. Once I get the bolts through the flex plate and through there, these washers are captive. They can't go anywhere. So let me bring back actually on that surface area point, I'll show you on the flex plate. You see, after now I've tightened this up on the car, the imprint that it's left on the flex plate on some of these holes. See on that one, you can actually see it's actually, you see it's narrow on this edge here, and it's wide there. That's the narrow edge of the way the orientation of the adapter is. But you see how much of an imprint that's made in the flex plate. So it's quite amazing. It's just not spreading the load out over a big enough area. So, well, actually, before I put that back on, just grab got a bit of dirt sitting on there, but if I grab now the straight edge, we'll use the same ones and sit that on there. Let's have a look at the gap. So we'll come down. Do you see now
it's spreading it much wider apart, which means it shouldn't, and over a much bigger area. So it shouldn't have as much influence in twisting the outside of the plate up, and it is much more even. So you see there, in fact, you actually see on the washer, under the underside of the right hand side of the washer, see how it drops away? And so yeah, this thick washer is going to help to ensure that doesn't mess too much with the and spreading the load out doesn't mess too much with changing the position of the ring gear. But if anything, now it's going to pull the ring gear in the direction of the torque converter and away from the starter motor. But yeah, hopefully that ends up with a better situation. So I'm confident that this is going to fix the clanging sound, but I am going to replace the flex plate. So I have another flex plate, thanks to Lyndon. So I've got another flex plate that I've already bolted onto the car and bolted it up. And with the original flex plate and the starter motor in position, I never ever thought to check this, but with that bolt, obviously it's bolted up to the engine. Then I mounted the transmission to the engine, and I didn't put the starter motor in until the whole engine transmission was back in the car. But what I found was that once I had the transmission out and still had the engine in the car with the starter motor, was when I turned the engine by hand, this ring gear was actually hitting the starter motor, just turning the engine by hand. So if I tried to start the engine even without the transmission, it was gonna even do more damage to this. So it was pulled even, well, yeah, it's warped. That's without the torque converter to help pull it straight. It was hitting the starter motor. This one here, I've test fitted it on the car and rotate the engine by hand, and it easily clears the starter motor. So I'm confident I didn't do anything to warp that. I'd say it's a factory issue, but I'd say it doesn't really matter, because normally on the torque converter it's designed to mount on, the torque converter pulls that back into shape. But because we were doing these little offset things with the DomiWorks adapters, we basically transferred the warpness of the warp angles, or the warp in the flex plate, across to the position of these DomiWorks inserts. But with this, oh, bang, there we go. With that in place, put that around to position. No matter now where I position this, it feels a lot firmer. So we've got all those washers in there, so the load is being spread on the washers. Obviously, if I push down on the very outside edge, it rocks on the washers, but rocking on the inside, I'm not getting any rocking noise. So even though my adapters maybe aren't perfectly positioned and they're on a bit of a weird angle, I don't necessarily need to grind the welds off and rectify them. There is a potential argument that because they're on a slight angle, I do need to grind them off, because it's going to pull the bolt head. It's basically that slight angle is going to pull the bolt head also into the edge of into that. So I need to think about what I'm going to do for that. Whether I put washers on these bolts to hold these in, maybe putting some washers to help spread that load around, and to move it effectively away from the inside of the edge of that, where it's not supported. Try to take that off. Where it's not supported by that washer. I can't get that off single-handed. There we go. So I basically need a washer that's big enough to bring the load out to at least the inside edge, just past the inside edge of that. So a washer with an outside diameter that's at least a little bit bigger than the inside diameter of this washer, and that should help spread that load around, and help ensure that even though these little adapter inserts maybe aren't perfectly square with the face, that the angle of the bolt doesn't pull the edge of the flex plate in any funny directions. In hindsight,
maybe I would consider not using the Dommy Works kit, but this adapter I think is absolutely critical unless you've got a spare crank lying around to center it. That you really do need this centering adapter. So yeah, just that I think it's worth doing it with washers, and welding those things in with washers means that they would end up properly square in the right position. And even if your flex plate is warped, it doesn't matter. It's going to pull everything nice and flat. You'd tack weld those in, and everything would be okay. And maybe with the tack welds, where I've put 4 tack welds, sort of 1, 2, 3, 4. Maybe it's better just to put 1 on each side. You can see that from my measurements, they've actually ended up all very consistent, you know, at least from one side to the other. I mean, that one's 2.1, that one's 1.9, but that's the problem of the warp flex plate. But the angle from this side to that side, the 2 welds either side is pulling that. It's just the extra welds here really pull that through further than this side. So I just put little tack welds either side, and really the tack welds are only there to just hold it like you're holding a spanner on the back of those when you're tightening the bolt up. They don't really need to be welded in too much. Okay, a few moments later, these washers are all in place. I'll explain the circles in a minute, but they've all just been tack welded on, just on the same literal position. It's sort of like 3 o'clock on each one, just one little tack weld, and then I'll file the top off the weld just to make sure that it doesn't sit proud of the washer. So they're all in place. I'm thinking just one weld because it only needs to hold it in place while I bolt it up, and then those washers are captive, they're not going to move, so that ensures they're held in place. But if it needs to sort of rock a little bit or slide a little bit, it allows a bit of movement, and it will just crack the weld if it needs to. I've located them hard up against that edge there so that the bolt ends up as center as possible in the center of this washer. So obviously these Dommy Works adapters are offset hole, and so the gap is the same position on all of them, and the weld is in the same position. So from a balance perspective, and the size of the weld is the same, so from a balance perspective it shouldn't upset the balance of the torque converter. What I did notice using a straight edge is that all of these pretty much slope down and away, which I mentioned earlier. So if I put a straight edge on here, and this one's labeled P because it's a problem one. I think generally if I rest this on here, see I get there's a little bit of play in that one. There's actually a bit of a bend in the torque converter plate here that is different to all the other positions, and I've looked, there's no impact mark on it. I think it's just factory like that because these are the control surfaces that Sachs, who make this, I think, for BMW, create. So this is a control surface, these mounting pads for the original flex plate, and it's important that they are flat and in the right position, etc. But they really probably don't care what happens in between. This can be wavy, can have a bigger valley, deeper valley in between, or a higher valley, doesn't matter. This is the critical surface. So what we're trying to mount to is a surface that was never designed to be flat or used for this purpose. And so that's something to be aware of. Yeah, this one's got a little bit of a rocking motion. And if I come down, you'll see there it's touching on the right of the washer, and on the left there's a very, very small air gap. So when I tighten this down, it's actually going to pull the ring gear away now from the starter motor, whereas before the way it was sort of pulling it in towards the starter motor. But hopefully it does it evenly all the way around. And so what I did was got my other flex plate here and put it on, and I did see that the air gap is slightly different on some of this. This is definitely the worst one. So when I pull it down, this is going to pull further away than the other ones, but hopefully not so much that it causes a problem with alignment or balance or noises. So next thing to talk about is the washers then to use on top. So I think it's necessary to use washers. Dommy Works don't supply washers with these, but now I've created a mounting pad that is far away from the hole. This washer sits proud of the little Dommy Works adapter there. So if I put this bolt in with a very small, or socket head cap screw I should say, with a very small mounting surface underneath, it's going to put a slight bow or a concave in the flex plate where it bolts up to it, and that little concave is going to possibly wreak havoc with the ring gear and the alignment of everything. So I needed a washer that could spread the load around as much as possible and move the load to the outside so that it takes this bolt head, put that together, and moves it out much wider. So I had a couple of options. These little zinc plated M10 washers, they're 1.8 millimeters thick. With one of them on there, I had some of them lying around, and with one of them on there, it ends up sitting about there, and so it spreads the load out only as far as the first black line, which wasn't really ideal. I wanted to go wider, but can't go too wide because it's got to fit on the flat surface, on the flat area down in here. So it could probably be, yeah, maybe a 1 to 2 millimeter bigger diameter than this, but this is as wide as I can go on top. And I wanted to go thicker, and so this is 2.5 millimeters thick. It also happens to be stainless steel, but I think they believe they're made of gold because they charge $5.50 a washer. Buy them here, packs of 2 for $10, or for $11 for two of these. But it is important to get right. So they're the most expensive washers I've ever bought. But with that there, that spreads the load almost to the outside edge of this washer. And being thick, it shouldn't sort of bow or concave. Now I have had them on there and tightened them up, and had a close look at them, and they haven't like pulled into like a concave shape. These panel washers were used for a different purpose, but they're a lot thinner, but it's a bit hard to tell, but it's actually bowed and created like a concave washer because of how it's been tightened up, where I've used this washer before in a different application. And of course that diameter was too big to fit in there, and it was too thin. So yeah, turns out this was the ideal choice. Thickest stainless steel, and spreads the load out as far as I can go wide there. So that's the washer we're going to use then on top, and that's the purpose of those circles. So all the bolts in, just dummy fitting everything, centering boss in the middle there, washers in place. I've done these up all finger tight, and then I've just used the Allen key there just to give them, I don't know, like a 1/16 of a turn, just past finger tight, just to pull any slight flex out of the plate so that they all at least touch their respective underside washer evenly. And yeah, the gap is not as bad as I thought as far as the air gap on the outside edge of the washer. So I'm trying to show you one, but there you go, that's I might be able to just see through there. There we go. You see, like, yeah, tiny little air gap there on the outside edge of the washer. So I've used the feeler gauges and worked out it's about 0.1 to 0.15 of a millimeter. So variation is about 0.05 millimeters, which maybe 0.07 millimeters, which is hopefully very little and will be not too much to cause a problem. So I'll undo these now and go and install the flex plate on the car, and then put the transmission back in, and fingers crossed no knocking noises or clanging noises. So Before I bolt it back in, I'll point out that if you're using a kit from 8speed.au, you want to check the length of the bolts and preferably take a 1/2 mil off them. So I found after removing the transmission, there was bits of aluminium all around the edges of the ends of the bolts. And when I checked in the holes, there was an imprint, a really solid imprint in the back of the block where these bolts go through the adapter plate and then basically shouldn't touch the engine block, but they do. And they all bite into the engine block about a 1/2 millimetre or so, plus or minus a little bit. So yeah, you got to take that ridge off the end. Look, I really don't think it was, you know, causing a misalignment of the transmission, but that's what I'm doing with them, putting them on the linisher and just taking a bit off. And you can see there, it's like a donut shape that forms because of that ridge on them. But that should be enough now that they shouldn't touch the engine block. Right, so there they are. I've gone actually a little bit further on all of them. So it's all those six bolts, including the shorter ones. Taking about 3/4 mil off of those, and you can see it's still like a donut on the end of it, so it's not really actually removing any of the engaging thread. So these are the bolts that go through the transmission into the adapter plate. It's not bolts, they're countersunk socket head screws that go from the adapter plate into the block, and they all seem to be fine and pulling down fine. So in fact, I think some of those could have done with even longer thread on them, but these ones, yeah, definitely just need to be filed down a little bit. So with the modifications to the torque converter and the replacement flex plate, it's now running a lot smoother. There's no knocking noises from the transmission or bell housing, no clanging noises when trying to drive it. I have taken it for a 20 to 30 minute drive, and there's no noises that really concern me. It's a bit disconcerting because we've got solid engine mounts and solid trans mounts, no sound deadening in the car, so you do hear every noise, but there's nothing that really concerns me. And so I think that problem is resolved. And so pausing the video here for an update 6 weeks later or so, and I've ditched these solid aluminium transmission mounts and gone back to the rubber ones like that, the stock rubber ones. And that has significantly improved the NVH issues, particularly vibrations. And in fact, I don't think it was just the transfer of vibrations through these. I think these are actually creating vibrations. And the reason is that I've got solid engine mounts up front, and having solid transmission mounts means that I'm expecting the engine and transmission to act as a stress member. And unlike Ducati motorbikes that are designed to operate that way or be that way, this BMW was not. And when you're tightening all these bolts up with the car and a hoist, the chassis is, let's say, twisted slightly. You let it down, you've now got alignment issues and pre-stress in the whole setup. So definitely don't recommend using the solid transmission mounts. Stick with the rubber ones. I've put down at least half a dozen 9-second passes, including a 9.5-second pass on the drag strip, and I've been checking them for tears or damage, and they've been fine. The ones that I put in were second-hand ones from one of these setups that I had. They weren't even new ones. Just to also confirm that the stock tail shaft does fit with the 8HP70 and that 15mm thick adapter plate. So the stock tail shaft is still in there. I haven't upgraded the diff yet. The centre support bearing is bolted in where it normally would be, and when bolting this up, there's still free play forwards and backwards in this joint here. So stock tail shaft works with the 8HP70. So here's some footage from the first outing with the car, a roll racing event in which we were just running a base tune and collecting data for the tuner. So launching from a low 2000 RPM, the competitor gets away, and then I have fun reeling them back in. And 2 months later, with some tuning by Wedge Performance, we set a new world record for a twin turbo N54 on the quarter mile, as well as achieving a record as Australia's fastest rear-wheel drive BMW. Thanks for watching and good luck with your conversion.